Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for turning out in really quite good numbers on a Thursday evening. I think we can all agree, even if we look at our own work over the last 20 years, what an incredibly important subject this is. I'm your host, Imogen Foulkes, a journalist, and I can say for myself, I started 25 years ago cutting radio tape with razor blades, and now I carry my entire television and radio studio around with me on a laptop, and I can go live from my mobile phone without even having to run into a studio. Those are the changes and the challenges I have faced, and I'm sure everybody in this room has similar tales to tell. What we're going to do today, I hope, is unpick the challenges that all those changes are bringing to us, and how do we ensure that not just the companies who develop the changes or the companies who become more efficient because of these changes, but every single one of us continues to have a stable, comfortable, and fair working environment. We have, as ever, to be expected from the Graduate Institute, a fantastic panel with a really wide array of expertise. To my right, we have Ambassador Jean-Jacques Elmiger of Switzerland, then Tarja Halonen, former President of Finland, Orlaigh Quinn, I have to get my glasses on to read this, Department of Business Enterprise and Innovation from Ireland, Ryder, of the International Labour Organization, director of, and Richard Baldwin, Professor of Economics here at the Graduate Institute. Quick little bit of housekeeping. What we're going to do is have questions and answers among our panelists, bringing in the very in-depth workshops we've had over the course of the day and some of the outcomes of them. And then in the final third, you also will be entitled to ask questions. We're very interested to hear your input. What I would say is we prefer questions than long speeches because it's such a big subject and we only have an hour and a half. We're going to have to finish promptly at 7:30. So, to begin then, quick fire round, starting with you, Ambassador Elmiger, just to set the scene. What do you see? What concerns you most, or what do you see as the biggest challenge facing work in the next 20 years?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting me here. I feel very proud to be with you this evening. For me, the most important challenge we have are at least two. How can we build or rebuild trust in the economic and social system we are living in? And the second one is how to give hope to our societies. Because I have the feeling that we are in a time that there is no more hope. I do believe that this kind of discussion we have here and also the activities of the ILO are a good way to bring trust and hope in our future world. Merci.
It's ready. Yeah, it seems to be. So fine. It's good because we will speak also, I think, quite much about the technological advancement, and even with Mike, you have to start with, is it ready? Anyway, so I'm the former president, but in the matter of fact, I think that doesn't disturb so much today. But I have been very much involved in first with the Millennium Goals, then the globalization, and then with the sustainable development. And of course, everybody speaks about the climate change. That's fine. But sustainability, the sustainable development and the saving this planet is really something which is concerning me. But I'm very hopeful. I think that we have quite much facts today. People know quite much about that, and especially the younger ones, and we need a little bit more years to see. And so it's just those who are actively in working life, they have not always time to think that what will be the future. And then I think that our challenge is that how we can get people committed really to work and to understand that the technological innovations, but also social innovations and the challenges what we have seen with all that, we have to solve them in order to give also at least a decent kind of the life for the future generations. But I'm hopeful. I think that people have started from small things to make bigger ones. And you said that trust and hope, and that we need. Otherwise, people don't change anything. Thank you.
Orlaigh, Quinn.
Thanks, Imogen, and good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to be here this evening. Challenges we face. I mean, I head up the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation in Ireland, so that pretty much covers enterprise regulation, corporate regulation, science and technology. So some of the challenges I suppose I would see in my sphere and then more globally is the pace of change, the ability to adapt, flexibility in the workforce, real concern about people perhaps being left behind and how we address that. And then I think we need to look at the globalisation, the state of world politics, huge challenges. We live in a very small country with big neighbours on both sides of Ireland that present challenges to us. So that's a concern. And I think probably the whole focus on the future of work and the future of the economy and what that will look like in the future. So I think we've lots of things to talk about, Imogen. Thank you.
Ryder.
Your first point was really important. You just mentioned what work looked like 25 years ago in your case. And I think the contrast with today should make us all duly humble about our capacity to imagine what things will be like 25 years from now. I see a lot of forecasts about what things will look like 25 years from now, which I think are stated with unwarranted certainty or confidence. So what do we have today? We have, as all has just said, a situation of transformational change, probably of an unprecedented nature. What's making that happen? Well, above all, technologies, but also climate change and what we have to do to combat climate change, demographics, and of course this rather uncertain process of globalization. So the challenge is to direct those changes to where we want to get to in the future of work. And, you know, the future doesn't exist, it's not waiting for us, it's for us to make, which is a crucial point. This is an agenda of human agency. It's not sort of predetermined. So what sort of things would we like to see our future of work look like? Well, there are a few buzzwords out there, aren't there? Inclusiveness. I think we want everybody to have a place in the future of work, not just as a matter of economic survival. You have to work to have a decent standard of living, but because having access to work is actually a value that goes beyond the purely economic measure that it has. So we want work to have a certain meaning. We want stability. Interesting, you use that word in your introduction, sort of reflexively. I find sometimes there's a celebration of disruption which makes the idea of a search for stability somewhere a denial of the future. It's wrong. And above all, equity. We want a satisfactory level of equity in our labour processes at a time of growing inequalities measured over several dimensions, which is eroding this notion of a social contract, this notion of a fair deal, which is inherent to anybody's working life. You know if you think you're getting a fair deal or not. And if you don't really understand that and the loss of confidence and trust that goes with it, just take a look at your atlas and pick out Chile and Colombia and Lebanon and Iraq and a few other places. So there's a lot at stake in this debate.
Baldwin.
Thank you. So I'll just pick up on a couple of things to stress a few things that you said, Imogen, and also the Secretary General. I mean, I would focus on digital technology disrupting things. And I think that the changes are coming faster than most people believe and in ways that few expect. And I like the structure of the 4 building blocks of this conference. I think covered many of the big issues. I just want to stress one, that is, digital technology is changing the nature of globalization and bringing global competition into the service sector workforce. And yet much of our international governance, especially on labor and taxation, is premised on the fact that it's things made somewhere that are crossing borders. And the regulation of labor standards and taxation are much harder when it's disintegrated into telemigrants sitting all over the world. So that's the one thing I would stress that we really have to work on together.
Okay, thank you all very much. I found this really interesting. Trust and hope, I think, were key words there, but also was this flexibility, new skills, reskilling, which of course was a subject of the first workshop. But yet, you said, Guy Ryder, you're wary of predicting, and that, you know, people said things 10 years ago which turned out not to be the case, and you, Mr. Baldwin, says things are happening so fast that we can't predict. How then, and I want to unpick a little bit some of the discussion in workshop 1, how do we work on having a constantly reskilled or new skilled workforce if we can't even predict the change?
So perhaps I face this challenge every day because I happen to be nowadays also the chair of the Helsinki University. And it's our oldest and biggest university. And then the present government also challenges us and say that we have to take much more seriously now lifelong learning. And then to see that how we can put the different kind of educational systems together. And some of you might know that the Finnish education system is not poor. We are pretty good internationally. Said even it's difficult for ourselves to say that something is good. But anyway, and so there are the different type. If you think that preschool education, yes, we all agree on how to do it, and it's very, very important. Then we have the youth age education, what we have also made quite well. But then we noticed already when the young ones, they are about at the age of 20, that some of them are dropping out of the system, and we should help them. But even those who are doing well, so they will finish with such kind of the career, either at a vocational or at a higher level, that they know already that it's not for the lifelong time, that they have to be prepared to do it like a ladies say, the little Legos. To put it together, we should have a plan how to do it so that when you reskill yourself, when you get an extra education, that it will be built, it could be built on those blocks what you have. And this is, of course, just a challenge in such kind of the country in Europe, in north part, and well, good education. But then we have the very big part of the population of this planet who have not this background and who should also to try to keep the same speed. Otherwise, we don't keep everybody on board. It's not only the good idea, but otherwise we don't save the whole planet if we don't do that. And that's why exporting the education, not the model, but the skills how to do it, it's also a very important issue, and I think it's also an important issue to ILO, so that at all levels of education we could organize it with the state, with the employers, and with the employees, in which way the people really have this opportunity, not only when they become unemployed perhaps, but much earlier. Okay, now I always very, very enthusiastic.
Orlaigh, Quinn, you wanted to come in there.
Just when you ask about how do you adapt on the skill sets, I think the skill sets we need to have and to teach people are different than the skill sets of old, where perhaps you learned a trade and you stayed in that trade. Now you have to be flexible, and I think the ability of the soft skills are hugely important. In Ireland, we have a very young population. A third of our population is under age 25, half is under age 35. And one of the areas we're really trying to focus on is where we tend to talk about the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering and maths. We're actually calling them the STEAM subjects, where we bring in an A for arts, because again, it's expanding people's creativity. And I think if we can do that, we have a much broader perspective. The other thing I would mention as well, we sometimes talk about the soft skills like people skills, curiosity, HR skills. Again, just to mention the value of women and the role of women in the workforce, where we know they're not as present, and particularly in developing countries where there's particular issues, but to recognise that half the population have half the talent and half the skills, and to make sure and ensure that we build that into our models as well, I think is hugely important.
I was telling to some of the panelists, as a part of my BBC work, there are interviews taking place in Zurich for a new young people's programme, where we were interviewing a futurist who was asked to tell 13-year-olds what they should be, expecting for their careers. And basically said, machines are going to be able to do almost everything. Your uniqueness is that you're human. But how do we, it seems to me an enormous challenge for institutions and businesses and governments to, you touched on it there. You said you brought the A into STEM and arts is to accentuate the creativity, the uniqueness of the human creative mind. But nevertheless, I know one of your points in workshop 1 was this humans versus machines. People are actually quite frightened of losing out. Guy and Richard, maybe, and then I did want to ask you as well, Ambassador.
Well, actually, I wrote a book about this. Have I mentioned my book yet?
There are 10 copies back here.
Globalization, Robotics, and the Future of Work. And the way I would go about this is not to think about what will be the jobs of the future. We can't know those. No, exactly. When people were leaving the farms in 1850, they had no idea they'd be working in the auto industry because there wasn't an auto industry. But you can think sensibly about what skills you will need in the new jobs. And the way I would go about that is to think of as a process of elimination. So the jobs of the future will have humans doing things that AI can't. So you have to think what AI can't do. And if you read the experts, I'm not an AI expert, but I've read most of them, you look down the list of the things that are most automatable, it's the most human skills which aren't likely to be automated by AI software in the next 10 years or 20 years. So that means creativity, ethics, curiosity, innovation, dealing with unknown situations, managing and motivating large groups of people. Things like that working in teams, being super flexible. Those are the skills I think we have to teach the young people. And also, as the president said, teaching people to learn, not just stuff. And that will be a key core. So that I don't think we have to predict the jobs. We just know what skills they might need, and those are the most human skills.
I may be a bit cynical here, but it strikes me that given the way some thinking has gone and the way some of our institutions of higher education have gone, and business, that persuading people that an investment in creativity and ethics and that this is kind of a working model might be quite difficult. We've moved quite a long way from valuing that kind of thing. Guy Ryder?
Yeah, one thing I think experience shows us is people's educational choices respond very badly to labour market signals. Young folks do not make rational choices always about what they study with a view to earning in the future. If they did, there'd be a lot more people training to become plumbers, carpenters, instead of doing other things at university. But, taking on board all the very, very, very persuasive and compelling points that have been made. That's a great line, going from STEM to STEAM. That's a great one. Or Richard, the creativity and training people or helping people along the way to do the things that AI cannot do. It all sounds right to me. But going back to your original point, Imogen, you said, look, we're trying to anticipate the skill needs of the future when we've just sort of taken as a starting point the idea that change is so quick that our, scope of vision is necessarily limited. So we cannot know what those skills will be. We can make a best judgment on the basis of current knowledge, but the fact of the matter is we cannot anticipate today the types of skills that are required in a working life, in an average working life. And that makes the point that rather than trying to identify in this way the skills, we have to put in place the mechanisms that allow constant renewal of skills, because change requires that. And this takes us back to the thing everybody agrees on, lifelong learning. Everybody agrees. I haven't met anybody who doesn't agree that lifelong learning...
Yeah, but how to do that?
And then you go up to 3 questions. how do you do it? Who delivers lifelong learning? We're not very good at that. Who pays for it? Is it the government? Is it the employers? Who's responsible? Is it the individual, or what is it? And I think we really have to make our best guess, and I think a lot of it is guesswork about required anticipated skills, but then put the infrastructure of lifelong learning into place, because we don't have a question to the an answer, to the question that President Halonen just put.
Ambassador Elmiger, I'm just wondering if Switzerland has something particular to put into this debate, since it is ranked as one of the world's most competitive economies, has one of the highest attendance of evening classes on the planet, and also ranks often as one of the happiest countries. So have you already cracked this problem?
No, I think that we are quite pragmatic on this issue, and we just consider that the way to make the need of the labor market with what kind of formation or what kind of vocational training we have on the labor market could fit together. I think it's very important to be sure that we have this fitting between these two needs, and it's a way we are working around also promoting social dialogue. I think it's very important, because you cannot bring the people on board to discuss on the future of work if you do not want also to bring a platform for this. You have to invite people to discuss together, and if we just stay and say, okay, tomorrow will it be like this, okay, but it will not bring anything forward. And it is the same also for me at the international community. We should bring new ideas. We should think about new ways of approaching the work problematic, and also the lifelong learning, but at least a way that promoting social dialogue and promoting social partnerships, in good faith, that everybody can trust in the system in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I just wonder, we've got the chair or the facilitator of our first workshop. You're here. Have we done justice to your discussions? I know they were much more in depth than what we've got here, but.
Well, yes, we had many participants with a lot of ideas, and there's no way I can give them all, but there was one, which is that we have to shorten the return on intellectual investment, the ROII, basically, because we need to finance this investment as well. So that was one of the questions. Of course, what they came up with was tax deduction of any lifelong learning activities, and lifelong learning accounts for individuals. So these are maybe some of the important things. They talked about trust. You mentioned trust as well. It was also trust in the system for you, but also trust in AI. The idea was to exploit AI capabilities to help individuals navigate the world of work and matching skills of individuals with jobs. So that's also a point which seems to be very important. But there's tons of others, but at least that's it.
Well, with all of this is going to feed into, hopefully, more of it as we're going to come on to, an ongoing discussion and sharing of skills and experience about this. Let's move on, though, to something you just touched on, Ambassador Elmiger, and you did too, to do with social dialogue and people feeling that they have a stake in these changes, that they're going to be protected from a kind of, profit motive, tooth and claw, and that won't be, I was skilled in something, but now they don't need me anymore, which we all know somebody that's happened to, I'm sure. So maybe I'll start this one with you, Guy Ryder. It must be a big challenge trying to bring the present standards of worker protection to such a changing work environment.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, as you say, that the extent of change taking place in the world of work presents us with is a question of whether the established institutions of the labour market, by institutions I mean the legal concepts that we use to define employment relationships, the very existence of an employer and an employee, about which a lot hangs. I mean, think of an Uber driver and think through everything that goes with all of that. The appearance of the gig economy, and not just the training aspects of all of this, but Richard, as you indicated, how do you start to take on the task of regulating a digitalized exchange over international frontiers, which raise issues which frankly are existing ways of regulating labour markets just do not contemplate. So we do have to look at these things, but there are some constants in all of this as well. Our constitution at the ILO famously says labour is not a commodity. So just think what we need to have in place to make sure that labour is not exchanged as one more commodity on labour markets. So you need legal protections, you need social protection, you need processes of bargaining and dialogue. And I think we do have to have a very good look at what we have today and to see if it will fit this digitally mediated world of work of the future. And my point on all of this is take a good hard look at what we've got. Don't believe we have to jettison everything. I mean, the things we've accumulated for 100 years, a lot of that will stand the test of the future, but other things won't. So, I think all of these ideas are really crystallized in the idea of, well, what are we going to do about the gig economy? What are we going to do about it? Because it could be great. There could be loads of wonderful things. Technologies that allow people to work anytime, anywhere have obvious attractions. The flip side to that is if you're obliged to work anytime, anywhere, it's a great deal less attractive. And we've got to work out how to extract the upside and prevent the downside.
Tarja and Orlaigh, I'd be interested to hear from your respective countries what approaches you are taking this to protecting workers or worker protection in this much more fluid, flexible is maybe an over-positive word to describe it, but the fluid world of work.
So in the country like Finland, where we have the population only 5.5 million, and where the women are already involved, they are as big part of the labor force than men, in some age parts even bigger. And so at the same time, we know that we don't get enough babies. People love babies, but they think that it's fitting very, very poorly for the system where you should be all the time flexible and do this and that. And then what we think is that it's not only so that employers and employees can do something. So I'm very strongly for the Nordic system in such a way that state has also the role. State could be the helping hand, both concerning how to organize the help for the families with children or old age people, or whether you need some kind of break for other reasons for your working life. But everybody knows nowadays that young people, they are not at all so, I thought to say work addicted, but perhaps I should say that they are not the similar what their parents were in 1980s, 1990s, that they were ready to sacrifice whatever in order to get a career. Nowadays, the young people, they have a different kind of thinking, what they expect from the work. The work is, of course, more than just the social welfare. It's the participation of the adult people in the society, so that you feel that you can produce something either as an employee or as an entrepreneur, what the others also consider to have a value, and good that you get also your incomes. But I think that working life and the family life, or let's say the private life, the combination of that has a lot of challenges. And people try to solve it in different ways, and not always in the way what the market or the state would like.
Yeah, a couple of points. I mean, one of the things we're doing at the moment is we're really looking at remote working and flexible working and how we can support that. I laughed when the government minister that I work with launched it, because she launched in terms of, the right to turn off so that you're not always available. And I texted her that I was reading it while I was on holidays in Greece. So clearly I hadn't turned off, so that's my responsibility. But I think when we look at the world of work nowadays, in some ways there are lots of opportunities. I don't think we should always see it as a problem or a difficulty, because I think the flexibility that's now available through technology, if we harness it correctly, absolutely offers us a much better work-life balance. I think the day of where you came in to work, be it in an office, a factory or a hospital, wherever, and you had your set hours and people were present, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were productive. Where I think the trust, and it's maybe back to trust for people to be able to work flexible hours, does support a better life balance and does support a family life in ways, if we can understand it, if we can regulate it, and if we can make sure that we don't have the always-on culture. I do certainly think, and I take the points about the gig economy, I think it's a different way of working that we're not used to, but I think suits a lot of people. But I think to underpin that then, we need to make sure that we have the proper laws and regulation, that people still have proper health and safety, proper work rates, proper pay, proper hours. So I think there's always that regulatory piece that we have a responsibility to ensure is there. And I would be more of an optimist, I think, Imogen, in terms of opportunity for different ways of working. Certainly, I think when we look at across the world and you look at the things like traffic and things like family life, I think there are ways we could be far more flexible in the way we do it. So there are some of the things that we're looking at, trying to tease through how we can do that. It won't work for everybody. It won't work for every age group. It certainly won't work for every job. But I think if you're open and flexible, there are opportunities that can support us.
Richard Baldwin, I want to ask you this. It reflects a little bit what Orlaigh was saying, because you said you're an optimist, but nevertheless, we're looking at the doubts and fears that some workers may have. I'll give you one concrete example. I have a friend who is a translator, and she has done all of the stuff required inside Switzerland to bid for work, and done all of the qualifications, and she's multilingual. She has not got the work because it is being outsourced to countries where the translators' rates are cheaper. I mean, what is there to protect somebody like her? I mean, basically, she's saying, well, in Switzerland, she will not get the work to be able to pay, for example, her astronomical health insurance in this country.
Well, so there's actually nothing new about this challenge, and that is trade in translation services was essentially prohibitively expensive. Technology has made the trade barriers come down, and comparative advantage will assert itself. Some people will have to change jobs because that's the way international trade works. So I think the response is not to say we have to find some way to protect this job. I think we have to find ways to protect workers, not jobs. Because as trade barriers come down in services due to digital technology at an explosive pace, the example of your friend will be multiplied enormously. And I thought you were going to go with machine translation, which is also picking up hugely. But so both what I call globots, both sides of the globots on that job. But ultimately, you can't stop that sort of thing because that's what globalization does. It means people who have to move out of some jobs and into other jobs, and the job of governments is to give people the tools to do that and make sure that they feel they're part of the process of sharing the wins and losses of globalization. So really, I think it's an issue of transition, really, to go along. And I'm sorry for your friend, but globalization is always more opportunities for the most competitive people in a country and always more challenges and competition for the least competitive. And it turns out Swiss translators are a little overpriced by international standards.
Okay. Ambassador Elmiger, I'm going to another question related, but a very different kind of work. We saw the women's strike in Switzerland earlier this year, and one of the key issues around that was the amount of unpaid work, particularly care work, the kind of work that humans do well, that women do, of children, their own children, but also of elderly relatives. Now, is this something that you think that the modern economy needs to be looking at much harder, that this is something that needs to be rewarded now and factored in?
I can answer very simply, yes.
Good, thank you. That's what I wanted to hear. We've got... Well...
It's not my duty because I am not a politician.
You're not the finance minister, okay. We've got Azita here, who was the facilitator of our second workshop. Have we reflected some of the issues? Do you have other points you'd like to bring in?
Maybe a couple of other points. One was, how can we address the challenges of future of work, technology and future of work, in the same go as a coherent whole with the challenges of environmental transition? And how do we bring in synergies as well as address the trade-offs?
Does anybody want to answer that? Because that was on my list, actually. We had this issue of people are still always talking about economic growth, and is this actually what we need right now? We're supposed to be. We saw it yesterday. We've seen it all this week, the predictions about the environment and the climate. So we have this huge change on multiple levels on how we work, where we work, how our economies function, and our climate. I mean, do we need a much more kind of integrated approach on all of this? Guy?
Perhaps I can have a go at answering Azita's point. We're talking about different types of transition of work. One is the digital transition. The other is certainly the transition to carbon neutrality and climate neutrality. And, for a very long time, I think we've been struggling with what turns out to be a false choice. I really think, and we certainly saw that, at the ILO, the real feeling was there was a choice to be made between growth, development and jobs on the one hand and protecting the environment on the other. It was one or the other. And that's actually gone now. At least, in the discourse it's gone. I think everybody understands the two things go together. But making them go together is not the easiest thing in the world. It is not automatic. If we just leave it to the way the world of work is evolving now, it's going to be too little too late. I think everybody will agree with that. I think it's quite encouraging that at the Global Climate Summit in New York in September, I think nearly 50 countries signed up to programs of what they call just transition. That is to work to align the path towards climate neutrality with a decent work agenda. But this is perhaps the biggest transition of our productive systems that any of us can probably recall in the past or can conceive of in the future. And the point is, it's not an option. We've really got to make it happen. And this is going to require us to do things that are somewhat out of fashion these days. Planning, industrial planning, thinking ahead. Yeah, things that resonate with the 1980s, but it ain't an option. This type of transition, and it's on the agenda now, and it will happen. And you're seeing it happen. You're seeing it happen in the automobile industry, you're seeing it happen in energy, you're seeing it happen in many places. And the research that we've done shows that the potential is there, and I think potential is the right word, for this to be a job creator rather than a job destroyer. But I repeat, it ain't going to happen on its own. It has to be worked at.
Tarja, I can see you.
Very briefly, two things. We have it's at Helsinki University and then also Aalto University, some other universities. We just had last week a so-called slush, which doesn't mean the slush in the streets, but they have chosen a name for this meeting place in a way that nobody will steal it anyway, slush. And so it was an idea that those who are making the research work at the universities or other institutions, and then those who want to get these results to change to the innovations, and perhaps they would like to finance. We thought earlier that would be the question of money, that whether we get enough finance. What we have noticed now is that it's not a lack of money. There are a lot of people who have money. So even so that some economists say that we have too much money now falling in the system. But anyway, so it is possible. All that, the new innovations, technology, but also social innovations and everything. So I mean, this is a big opportunity. But the question is, of course, that when these people do it, this bargaining, and so later on when they should grow bigger. So it's also the question of the employees, those who will work in these places. And I know that he wanted a little bit tease me, say that it's not my business, because he knows that I will immediately say back that it should be your business too, because otherwise, if just the markets are doing their choices and then they say to the politicians, now you organize it in such a way that we've got happy families and a lot of babies and everything possible. And so it doesn't work in such a way. We have to have a tripartite, like, I don't know how they were so wise when they founded ILO, but there should be also the state, there should be both sides from the markets, and there should be perhaps also the universities, should be NGOs and everything, and then come together and to see it with what you said, with your trust and hope, that it is possible to solve, not easily and not at once, but step by step. And I think that we are already now reaching the right direction that we see. And as I mentioned already earlier, I repeat that the young people will say very easily that they want to get also the full life, and not only the job, but also the job. And I think that that will also, employers, they will face that.
Ambassador, I think you looked as if you wanted to say something.
No, not specifically. But I think that also raises the question of the importance of social dialogue. Yes. And social dialogue is something that is very broad from my point of view. It is a dialogue between all the actors of the societies, not only something that is bound to some groups. And it should be inclusive. And we are not in a position to give answers to global problems or global challenges if we are not able also to start the social dialogue at the national level before bringing it at the international level. And I just remember what I saw at the television a few days ago. You have a lot of people just showing that they have political demands which are not filled by the governments. We have a lot of pictures of people who just feel social inequalities as a priority to promote solution and so on and so on. Then I think we have all the signals to start a new round of social dialogue, but an inclusive social dialogue. It is also what we discussed in the workshop, and I think it was also one of the key elements of these discussions, that also we have to be aware that also international organizations have to be active on that items, and also they have to be very close to the members of the organization and to the people, because I just believe also that we are speaking about job for tomorrow and so on and so on. Okay, we just speak about workers, but what about entrepreneurs? Yeah, both are directly involved, and at least as long as the system functions as it is for the time being, we need employers to get jobs and to have workers. That's the reality for the time being. Maybe tomorrow it will be completely different. But for the time being, we have a transition phase where we move maybe towards something we don't know, maybe for the future, but we have a model and we have to build on it, and we have to develop solutions. We have to, all of us, think about our future, and the only way is to promote social dialogue.
Peace.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question that just brings us on to our, also to the third workshop, and Jean-Michel, I would like you to bring you in as well, but I'm wondering how a social dialogue works, if you look at the traditional meaning of the word dialogue, when the world of work is changing so much, when what is an entrepreneur, what is a worker, there's a huge informal economy. An entrepreneur and a worker can be the same person. I mean, how do you get this dialogue going, and how do you then, I mean, part of the social dialogue is to make sure that people feel included, they feel they're protected. Somebody who works sometimes from home, when the phone rings and they say, do this, where do you get the dialogue with that person, and where do they get their protection? Ryder, maybe? And then maybe Richard.
Yeah, I mean, again, everybody's going to be in favour of social dialogue. Everybody is going to be in favour of inclusive social dialogue. Nobody left out. I mean, these are the things we start with. But if you look, I mean, you've got to think a bit about how this really works in a practical way. You know, you see, let me put it in a blunt way. You know, you cannot have a dialogue with a mass protest in a square or a street. You know, there was an attempt by the French government recently to set up a dialogue with the Gilets jaunes when they were going strong. What happened? Well, you need someone to talk. Who do you talk to? Anybody with a Gilets jaunes in the street? No. You need a representative. You need somebody who say, I can represent this group or this constituency. And of course, in the case of the Gilets jaunes, as soon as somebody presented themselves as a representative, they were disowned by the people, you know, who were wearing the Gilets jaunes. So you need some basis of structuring of dialogue. Now, this might sound old-fashioned, but there is a notion of representative legitimacy. And so in the end, and certainly in the world of work, somebody who turns up and, you know, is heard as a voice of a particular constituency has to hold some type of representative mandate. It's not a free-for-all, it's not volunteering. And that is why membership organizations, the process of organization, needs to be the basis of effective social dialogue. And that creates some issues, which I'm ready to acknowledge, because certainly in the world of work, it's about governments, ministries of labour, who hopefully have a democratic mandate. It's about employers and employers' organisation, and it's about trade unions. And people point to the fact that trade unions, in many cases, have a reduced membership, don't reach out into certain sectors of the workforce. If you're looking back over your shoulder to the past, not really including that informal sector, which still employs over 60%, 60% of the global workforce, and looking forward, well, how do you represent this digital economy, this diffuse and somewhat fragmented workforce? And those are real issues to which there aren't easy. It's not just that I don't have an easy answer. They're not today, I think, available to us. But you cannot, for those reasons, I think, say, well, you know, we don't need, or we're somehow delegitimizing the representative structures that do social dialogue. We need them. There is no alternative. But they have to be reinforced, and I think not as a matter of sectoral interest, but as a matter of the public interest. We need strong social partners, and we need strong processes to bring them together.
Richard, did you want to come in there? I mean, do you see the traditional tripartite way? Is that going to work in very much more fluid world of work?
Well, so I think in one sense it has to, it is, there are job creators, there's people who have jobs, and there's governments who govern job creation and job holders. So those three people are always going to be in the equation. What I'd like to stress is that digital technology has, in essence, disintegrated the traditional employment contract. The traditional employment contract existed for technological reasons. It was a way of employers to keep hold of workers that they needed and to avoid retraining costs and build teams. But now I think we can do remote work. We can disintegrate the tasks, work on a matrix-based, project basis. So the need for a long-term contract, a traditional contract, has disintegrated, and that's this gig economy or whatever we want. Now the trouble, I think, is that a large part of the social contract was written in a world where we had job-based capitalism. And by jobs, it meant traditional contracts. So some countries are better than others, where there's not an association between your job, your health care, your pension, your child care, whatever. But in some countries, there's still quite a lot of connection between a formal job and many of the social benefits that we've come to need. So in this tripart thing, I think government has to take a stronger role, because a lot of it had been put, social services, on employers who are now moving to a gig economy and aren't employers. So I think tripod, of course, but I think government really is the one that needs to rewrite the social contract for more flexible, more project-oriented. I'll have something to say at the very end. But
Okay. Yes, Jean-Michel, let's hear from you as the facilitator for top three.
Okay, no, I think the most issues were tackled in the debate, but I maybe just want to emphasize something that was mentioned during the workshop, and something that is quite important is that social dialogue at one point was presented as an abstract phenomenon, which means disconnected from certain categories of workers in the gig economy, in the informal sector, or in global value chains, or these kind of things. And I think that Jean-Jacques, Elmiger, and Guy Ryder tried to reconnect it somehow through this issue of representative legitimacy that is, I think, extremely important. But the question that I would have is, do you consider that it would be the task of traditional representative organization to include such workers, or would it be the task to rebuild new organizations with new representatives that are characteristic and specific to these sectors? And I think this is quite important, because making social dialogue real and concrete is something that will make it much more effective. And I would say that even this issue is very important for lifelong learning, because we all agree on lifelong learning, but to some people lifelong learning is something very, very abstract. If you have people that had hated school or apprenticeship or whatsoever, and you come up to them and you say, look, the solution is lifelong learning for you. They just hate it. This is exactly what they don't want to have. And so this makes it very abstract for them. And so we need to have notions that are more really connected to the real situations of people. This is a real challenge, I think.
Yeah, so I think that this is not the way how to do it. It's more or less that if the people know that they could have an interesting work, you can call it a job, and then they say that how to do it, and then you say that you have a good start, but you might be interested to know more, that in which way you can connect this and that, and so it has to be the need from the present situation how to do it, or a dream what they have in realistic dream, that what they could have. And I think that this is the way how we have tried to approach it, but somehow the educational institutions are a little bit formative in that way, that it's also difficult to create just an suitable blocks, or as I call always this Danish way, the Legos, that how to put it in such a way that it will fit for the present situation or the near future situation, but it should have also something, such kind of the more knowledge that you can use it also in other directions, because very seldom people have only one situation in their life when they then need one. And so, of course, when we speak more for the teachers, I say that every single child is, when it's newly born baby, they are so passionate to learn, both to sit and stand and walk and to speak and so. And so somehow they lose it, part of it already before the school, and the rest of it during the school education, more or less. And so nowadays we have much better education system, but a majority of the population in every country, always we have such kind of who have an old-fashioned education, because we are not sitting all the time at the school. And that's why we should find also the ways how to revitalize this curiosity and this approach to the unknown. But this is two technical words. But when I see that how the people learn the new mobile telephones and everything, and they can sit hours to learn it, not perhaps to get the new education, but to read something what they want. So I'm very optimistic. They will do it when we serve it in the right way. This is not concerning only the vegetables with the food. Okay.
You know, I haven't forgotten that I was going to offer the audience here a chance to ask some questions. I just want to talk briefly, because we've already entered into it to a certain point. Our fourth workshop, which was about governance, and you know, who basically governs the world of work now. And you mentioned, Fiona, when we were chatting previously, this tripartite, and is there still a role for that? Orlaigh, because we haven't heard from you for a while, I'd like to ask you first, is this something that, you know, in governments, people, are you thinking about this? How do we actually regulate, how is there governance over work now?
I definitely think there is a very strong role for a tripartite approach. I think certainly in Ireland we would be very strong in the collaboration space. So if I look at our innovation agenda, for example, we work very strongly between academia, between government and between the private sector. And all of our research centres are based on that tripartite arrangement. Now that's not, and I'll come back to the labour tripartite. But we have to recognise the value of diversity and the fact that people come to the table with different views. So we would see the value of that. One of the things we do when we develop any new strategy or try and point in a different direction, we do that on a very collaborative basis. So for example, we've just recently, we're developing a new AI strategy, and you know, we will refer to that as AI for good. But part of that would have been working very closely, obviously with the sectors involved, but more importantly with members of the public, so that they also will have a view. And that brings to the fore some of the fears, some of the concerns. But one of the things that would have come through very clearly on that consultation was issues such as ethics and issues such as governance. So we have to respond to that because that's very important. Employers groups and our trade unions would also have very strong views there. So one of the areas we will respond in looking at that strategy is most likely we'll bring ethics and governance to the very beginning of the strategy. So then we locate it within an absolute ethical and proper governance arrangement. So for me, I think it's trying to make sure that you hear all voices. And certainly when I think of when I grew up in Ireland, we had a very monocultural, very white population. 17% of our workforce now is non-Irish. And we have to work very hard, particularly within government, to make sure that those voices are represented and that we do hear that diversity of expression. So I think, Imogen, it's an ongoing piece of work. It's something that we always have to have to the forefront, that we are getting all the views. I think sometimes when we think of the employers groups and the labour and the trade union groups, we sometimes tend to think in more in the older professions, perhaps the older workforce, the older jobs, because that's where they would have been located and that's where they come from. But I have absolutely no doubt when I speak to employers groups or trade unions, they actually have very strong views on the new economy, the gig economy, and they have very valuable and strong views. So it's, for me, I think it's the collaborative approach, no matter what area we work in, whether it's on the innovation agenda, whether it's on the labour market side or the regulatory side in particular, because again, there is huge expertise and huge learning across the different sectors. So I suppose my overall message would be the listening one and the collaborative one. And I strongly believe that on that basis, we benefit hugely from the diversity of the experience we have available to us.
Guy Ryder, can I put this question to you as well? I mean,
yeah.
Just in this head of the ILO, I mean, do you ever feel your own organisation needs a lot of adaptation to face up to the current challenges?
I frequently feel that, actually. But just to try to answer schematically this notion of governance, I mean, what governs the working life of anybody in this room? The laws of the country in which we operate, and there are generally laws about perhaps minimum wages or the hours that we work or health and safety. So you've got the legislative governance. And then you've got the governance that comes from your employment contract. You know, what you agree with your employer, if you can find an employer. And here I have to disagree with what Richard said. I mean, the existence of an employment contract, in my estimation at least, Richard, is not primarily because employers want to retain workers. I think it's the other way around foremost. It's that workers need a document, a guarantee of what their terms and conditions at work are. And you'll find workers struggle to get a written employment contract more readily sometimes than employers ready to cede it to them. So you've got an employment contract, hopefully. That can either be an individual contract or it could be negotiated collectively. And this is why I think the existence, to be able to identify who your employer is and have that employment relationship is vitally important, because if you don't have that, an employment relationship becomes a commercial relationship. A purely commercial transaction between a supplier of a good and service and somebody who wants that good and service. And it's a temporary, episodic commercial transaction. And if labour becomes purely a commercial transaction, you are commodifying labour. You are commodifying labour with all that that implies. And this is, I think, one of the great challenges of the digital economy and the gig economy. You know, as it's been said, we run the risk of creating a 21st century generation of digital day labourers unless we're very, very careful. So these governance issues matter a lot. And I can see you want me to wrap up. No. There is an international bit to all of this. Do we want to establish that level playing field that makes sure that competition on international labour markets is undertaken with basic minimum standards that we would all wish to see respected? That's where the ILO comes in a bit.
Richard, I imagine you want to respond to that, and then I'll just ask you briefly, Fiona, for your...
So, well, the only thing I would sort of pick up on is one very, very particular thing, which is the international platforms that are doing the freelancing. For instance, the people who are selling the translating services. I think there's something we could do pretty easily. That is, these people know who's working for them because they have to pay them. They have to have a bank account. So they could enforce basic labor standards through the platforms. Moreover, the taxation of that income is a very unclear question now. And yet those platforms, at least, for instance, Upwork, which is the largest one, gives a 1099 form to the US government for US-based freelancers. That could be done globally, and pretty much as a piece of common practice, as long as all of them did it together. So that's just one little bit of coordination and governance that I think is going on. And I think the idea of child labor online, being done online, will become a scandal, will become a big issue, and could be fixed with maybe, I don't know, facial recognition or Bitcoin, who knows, not Bitcoin, but blockchain. I had to mention blockchain.
Whole other debate. Yeah. So. Fiona, do you want to just give us the key points or ones we've left out, which I'm sure we have?
Okay, well, in our group, we actually looked at the broader international picture around the government's work, and we looked at two kind of areas. One was how can multilateral institutions further strengthen their joint work on sustainable future of work, and our response was we need to develop organisational models which lead institutions progressing shared agendas. For example, the ILO would lead on the labour standards piece. They would work within agreed frameworks which would include accountability for delivery. So this would be a mechanism to deliver better for people, and it would also assist if there were kind of in overcoming kind of political gridlock in terms of different organisations, you know, with their own agendas, and politics comes into it always at some place. The other area we looked at was around public-private partnerships, and can they be used more to deliver on the at the multilateral level. So there are a lot of concerns, certainly within the constituents in the ILO, around PPPs, and you know, one way of addressing those fears would be to enhance the transparency and creation of the PPPs, to have clear terms and conditions and monitoring systems in place to ensure that they adhere to the ILO mandate. And then, you know, the opportunities for PPPs would be that they can be used maybe to in the kind of the soft instruments, as our keynote developer was saying, to broaden the reach of the ILO with regard to embedding labour standards and the employment rights to other fora where they're not embedded at the moment, and even to reach to constituents who are not currently represented in the ILO. And also, can it be used, given the pace of change that we've been talking about, can they be used to be more flexible, and that to react more quickly to issues as they arise. Could PPPs be an opportunity for that?
Okay, thank you very much. Now, you have been very patient. I'm coming to the audience a little later than I intended, and I apologise for that. But we've had a lot to talk about and 4 very in-depth workshops over the course of the afternoon, which we needed to reflect. But questions, points. Already. Sir, you have a microphone close to you, I believe. Yes, just coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Privileged to hear you. My question is mostly to Richard, but also to the rest of the panel. How is the digital technology affecting our possibility to ensure a socially acceptable income distribution, and that people would feel that they have rights to equal opportunity? I'm asking this because Richard mentioned many disruptions that are coming from digital technology. One that he did not mention is that digital technology is decoupling output from marginal cost of production, because data can be reproduced at zero marginal cost, or almost zero marginal cost. Therefore, the tendency is to concentration. So if you, and then prices have necessarily a rent component. And opening economies is no guarantee to you have more competition, precisely because this tendency of concentration. Now, with that, I would say, background of what we are seeing with digital technology, and add to this that capital has never been so cheap as now, because of the monetary easing and all the policies that we had after the crisis. Now, how can we trust market forces to find a socially acceptable deal?
Richard, I think that was...
You don't want to collect a bunch of questions?
Well, yeah, okay then. There's a lady there.
Taking the chance. Olena Carbu, a think tank liaison office in Brussels. And I have a question which has been opened especially by Mrs. Halonen and Professor Baldwin. This is the need and trends of changing social security system and adapting it to the changed labor environment and conditions. And you have partly elaborated this, but can you elaborate even more? And do we already think about what could be the toolbox of this solution, and what could be the role of these 3 major players? And I'm addressing all the speakers: state, employees, employers. Do we already have a good case studies where we can look around, and who is doing this job? Thank you.
Should we take one more, sir? I saw you first.
Thank you for this very interesting discussion. Rolf van der Hoeven, Erasmus University and Committee for Development Policy of the United Nations. I want to come back to one of the points just made at the beginning and also at the end, namely the issue of taxation. Richard Baldwin mentioned that, and all the other speakers actually mentioned it also indirectly, because they put much more emphasis on the role of the state in dealing with the world of work. Now, if we look back, what happens with taxation, we have seen that for over the last 25 years, company tax rates have been declining with a tremendous. And I see President Halonen nodding, because it's one of the points in her report, The Social Dimensions of Globalization, where it was indicated that the globalization without governance will lead to a race to the bottom in terms of taxation. And now we have come to the conclusion that taxation is very important to finance all these things. So my question actually to all the panelists is, and maybe also to President Halonen, is the notion that company taxes were going down very quickly was already there in the beginning of the century. Now, how have you been in discussions with international political leaders be able to convince them that there should be a level playing field on taxation? Because if we don't have a level, and I'm not joking, what we see now is the big firms, Google, etc., they don't pay taxes. And so how can we finance a social structure if there's no tax basis? So I think it's very important and very directly linked to the world of work.
Okay, three, really key questions here, and complex questions, which in a way almost illustrate the very thing we've been trying to do here, which is bring together different sectors to actually address some of these fundamental questions and the need, which you're going to tell us about in a minute, Ambassador, to go forward with that. But Richard, first, do you want to address the first question?
Sure. So as usual, Hector asked some super interesting, difficult questions. I'm going to dodge two of them and focus on the concentration. Can we rely on the market? And the answer is absolutely not. So data is a classic natural monopoly. The more you have of it, the more precisely you can target the advertisements, therefore the larger amount of the advertisement you get. And what we're getting towards is a duopoly in online advertising in the world, or at least in the Western world. So I think that really is something we have to worry about. And the trouble is our competition policy focuses on products, not advertising. So for example, when Google just bought Fitbit, that's not going to lead a rise in the price of Fitbit or price in Google search, which are all very low. But Google will now have more data, which will now then allow them to charge more for advertisement. So the trouble with our competition policy is it's focusing on the wrong point of all this agglomeration. So to me, I think these online search engines, these big platforms, the FANGs, should be broken up across the silos. Not that we should break up Google search, but that there's no particular reason that Google should own YouTube, for instance. And that's where I would go with breaking it up.
Tarja, Halonen, did you want to answer the question?
Yeah, taxation. I think that we would get a Nobel Prize in economics if we could find it so quickly here. But the question is, of course, that combining it with sustainable development and all this, especially this climate change issue, even it's, of course, all these 17 goals. So I think that more and more people are saying that it should be somehow to put in consumption, but that's not enough because those who consume and those who need are not always the same. And so I think that this is one of the big issues. And one thing what I always repeat is international finance markets, which is very weakly regulated as what. And that's why also when we see the phenomenon that there's a lot of money which is outside of all this system, so I understand why the Financial Times said that we have to help the market economy to survive, because they themselves thought that it will go to the wrong direction, and if they say so already, so I think that quite many others have started to think of it. But if I take a little bit smaller complex and say that I think that quite many countries who have a euro in European Union, so EMU. So we think that one way to control this could be the closer financial cooperation, also including taxation. But then question what I would say to you and many others, that how to sell it. Because people are not very much interested now to increase the power of the Brussels, and Brussels has not convinced us very much for the social-minded system, and that's why we have to find now what is the hen and what is the egg, in a way that which starts we could continue. But I think that sooner or later we will see that we have to combine our efforts. If we should try first in this little Europe and then to make it also global. But certain basic rules should be already. But The World Bank is not bad, but it's not their business. IFM, yeah. I think that multilateralism should be much stronger in that way. But surely you and me and many others have to come back to that.
And what about the second question from the lady?
I didn't hear the start. Could you repeat it?
Do you want to quit it? Because it was complex.
What you have already explored, the adapting the social security system into the changing job environment. So to keep this protection of the employees, and what is the role you'll start thinking about exploring more role of the state?
Yeah.
You have a good cases already.
From which country you are?
I'm living in Brussels, but I'm Ukrainian.
So you are close to Nordic countries. Come and study the Nordic welfare state, because this is a good effort. It's not. It's a little bit old-fashioned, and it's but that's a good start, because we can give an evidence even that it has succeeded pretty well when you think that we have been in the very far away in the corner, and Finland is one of the best examples. We are not an excellent, but I mean that we were the poorest, we were the last one, we were all that, and still we have managed to do that. And I think that it's two things. One is the solidarity in the generation, but then as important is this over generational cooperation. Otherwise you cannot build the education and the pensions and all this social security. It takes time, but I think that modern time you can do it much, much quicker. And you are coming from the very close country. Come and see us.
Orlaigh, Quinn, I think you wanted to also answer that.
Just a couple of points. I mean, I think the first point in terms of the fact that we talk about data and access to data, I mean, data is without a doubt the new gold, and people refer to it as the new gold because, as Richard said, the ability to mine data and to use it has both positives and negatives. I suppose I see some of the positives, particularly in the science side, in the medical research side, where the ability to access data now is enabling us to explore areas that we would never have been able to do before. But I absolutely think there are a lot of risks, and I think that's where we need a very strong regulation in the use of that data and the ability of that data. I think certainly on the tax side, we have to think about the role of the state, and certainly the role of the national state vis-a-vis the international. We would be very strong supporters of the BEPS project, the base erosion and profit sharing from the OECD, and I think that's beginning to come to a conclusion, and I think there will be difficult choices for countries, including Ireland, in terms of how that works. But I think it is at this point in time probably the only game in town in terms of that international approach. So I would certainly see that as where internationally there is at least some consensus for an approach to the BEPS. So I just mentioned that. I think the social security systems that you raised are so specific around different countries and what is available. One of the areas I would certainly see as a huge pressure for the future is, particularly at European level, is the ageing population. Are our systems actually capable of funding the pensions that we currently have? I also think when I look at our social security systems, they're built on very old models, some of them, where daddy went out to work and mommy stayed at home, and so we have child benefit and we have, you know, women in the home and we have workers. So I'm not sure we have tackled that. I don't think if you were starting now, you'd start from where we are, but that's always the difficulty. And any changes in these types of schemes tend to have both losers and winners. And from a political perspective, it's very hard to have a losers in our social security system. I would be more inclined to think about social security when we look outside of Europe and you look at our Asian countries or South America, where they're really only beginning to build some of these schemes, and again, the sustainability of those schemes over time. Anything in the social security area has to be paid for by taxation, and I think, as Tarja said, that's what funds our education, that's what funds our health systems. I would query whether the levels of taxation that are being imposed now, both in terms of companies and in terms of individuals, are sufficient to fund the ambition that we have. And I would certainly think there is a very large political task to shift some of that emphasis again. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. Probably answers more in terms of more concerns rather than answers.
Guy Ryder, you wanted also to come in there.
If I might, just to revisit the taxation question, it's quite interesting. I think taxation is very much on the international policy agenda again. Firstly, and Orlaigh's just mentioned it, a real new effort to get rid of fiscal paradises, prevent, tax evasion, aggressive tax avoidance of the type which I think everybody agrees is abusive. That's the first thing. The second thing is the ability of these digital giants, the GAFAs, to simply not pay taxes, or at least to do so on a minimalist basis. I think there is a growing international consensus that has to be put right, however it is done. But I think there's a third, issue here, and it was mentioned by the questioner. The secular decline in levels of corporate taxation around the world, and it looks as sort of a competitive bidding down of corporate tax levels, coinciding with an equally strongly marked increase of capital's share of national income. We've seen the labour share decline, the capital share increase for a matter of, 30, 40 years? Rolf, you know better than me. And there's a feeling this probably isn't right. And it goes to very basic political questions of taxation about appropriate distributional effects, regressive or progressive effects. And I think there's a strong feeling, we talked about the fracture of the social contract early on, that we probably haven't got taxation right. And it relates very, very directly to the other questioners' social protection, social security questions. Unless the state has an adequate tax take, there's a lot of things it cannot do that we would normally expect the state to do, one of which is the provision of basic levels of social protection. And we can go on about the appropriate mix of tax-based and contributory social protection systems, the linkages to different employment forms. They're big debates, but there's lots of evidence out there. The ILO is in the middle of its Social Protection Week. We've just issued a global study, a costed study on what it would cost to deliver the SDGs on universal social protection. So I can refer you to those studies if you're interested.
Okay. I'm not going to take any more questions. I'm glad nobody's got their hand up, sorry, but I have been told we have to finish promptly at 7:30. I'm going to go round our panelists just for a takeaway of key things. We started with key challenges, key goals, key things we really should be focusing on. And Ambassador Elmiger, particularly, I'd like to start with you because you already have a plan for a platform in Geneva bringing together experts who could look at the future of work. So tell us a bit about that, and then we'll move.
Thank you very much. I think it's very important to mention that the launch of this platform on the future of work today is a very, very important event, at least because it is the first step from my point of view. And just consider that also in Geneva we have all the competent organization regarding socio-economic questions and health questions too. I think we have here a pool of competences we should share all together, and also to give inputs and give a signal from Geneva in favor of multilateralism, because I have the feeling that for 100 years, multilateralism started really to be operative at Geneva. ILO is also a big part of the success of this the multilateralism, and it should continue like this. We have the chance to have many international organizations here around in Geneva. We have to give a clear signal toward multilateralism, because multilateralism is now at risk, and also to convince people that protectionism, nationalism are not solutions for the future. And not only for the future of work, but the future of our societies Thank you so much.
Tarja Halonen.
Yeah, it's not because we are now in Geneva and because of ILO, and so it could be a good reason. But I will say that I'm very strongly for the campaigning for the union activism. I hope so that also those who nowadays are considered perhaps by themselves or by the outsiders that they don't need to organize themselves. I hope so that you will make them convinced that they have to organize themselves in order to get the good contractors and in order to make a better world, because this is also important. And then when coming people who are outside still about your union organizations, it's always easier to come to the old one than to try to make a new one and then to facilitate together, because I think that a lot of labor disputes could be avoided if the old unions and old systems could be, also on both sides, of course, that they could accept the new type of the members and to try to work with that, because the world is starting with the small compromises, because I think so that it's really very, it's sad that so little is known that the sustainable development, it's not something what the people speak in academical level. It's containing the decent work, it's containing the normal everyday life. And that's why when people start learning to organize themselves, even the smallest thing, so they are ready to change the world. Thank you.
Orlaigh Quinn.
I think, look, I'd absolutely echo the need for the multilateralism. I think the importance of the international leadership is hugely important across the globe. I think I'd focus probably on embracing change, embracing technology, and embracing the opportunities that it offers. And then maybe just to focus a little bit then in terms of the development of skills and increasing participation and bringing in the groups that are excluded. And I think finally I'd focus a little bit on the collaborative approach that people bring, the diversity of their skills, be it at international level, at national or even at local level, and that we value that and we put value on that diversity, and very much to echo that point about preventing the rise of nationalism. I'd focus on those.
Guy Ryder.
Very quickly, I think the essential point is that the future of work is what we make of it. I mean, it isn't predetermined, it's easy to say, but it's a matter of human agency, and we have to do that job together in different ways. The second point, and I think this panel brings it out really well, is none of this is very easy. It's very difficult, it's very complicated. And so we need to continue these discussions. I think the platform that Ambassador Elmiger has just described offers a great opportunity to keep the conversation going, and we'll be very pleased to join in with it. So those are the 2 points. We have to do it, and we have opportunities to do it.
Okay. And Richard Baldwin.
So I'll be very quick here. I want to stress this idea that digital technology has disintegrated the traditional employment relationships, and that has put a hole in the social contract that was constructed around a different world. It has led to 2 things in particular: precarity among workers, and a type of new unemployment, which I would call downgrade unemployment. So your translator friend, for sure, I'm sure she's not unemployed, but she's not using the skills that so she's been downgraded, but not in terms of hours, maybe not even in terms of money, but it's a new form of unemployment that we don't know how to deal with. And in particular, I think we need to rethink the social contract in a situation where most employment relationships will be episodic and changing. And as a consequence, I think inevitably more of that social contract, annual leave, maternity leave, childcare, pensions, health care, all those things are going to have to go on to the government because they're the only stability thing in this whole thing. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. The ambassador has one last word that he...
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to formulate a wish, at least because I think we are speaking about the future of work here. We have, I hope, in the future also the opportunity to continue to discuss of this problematic, but at least we are very wise panelists here around on that scene, and my wish is please associate youth and young people for the future of your discussion, because the future of work is the youth of today, and do it because it is also a way for us to learn something from the expectation of the young people. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very nice and aspirational note to finish on. Can I thank you all for coming, for the good questions, to our 4 workshop facilitators for the input, and of course, put your hands together for our 5 panelists.